Today we're diving into one of history's most fascinating and, honestly, most conflicted figures, Marcus Aurelius. Now, you might know him as a Roman emperor, one of the famous five good emperors. But what's really incredible is the deep internal struggle that defined his entire life, the massive gap between the man he was forced to be and the man he desperately wanted to be.
Just think about that for a second. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. It's this powerful idea that true contentment, true peace, comes from inside. It's about mastering your own mind no matter what chaos is happening around you. So who do you picture writing that? Maybe a philosopher chilling in a quiet garden somewhere, or a monk totally detached from the messiness of the world? It sounds like it was written by someone who had all the time in the world for quiet reflection, right?
Well, the answer is the most powerful man on earth at that time, the Roman emperor himself. And this is the central paradox of Marcus Aurelius. Here's a guy who craved a quiet life of study and philosophy, but was instead thrown into a position of absolute power, with the weight of an entire empire on his shoulders.
So how in the world did a philosopher who never even wanted the throne end up with the top job? Well, his journey wasn't about ambition at all. It was all about duty. Let's unpack how this actually happened. It was basically a chain reaction of adoptions. See, back in 138 AD, the Emperor Hadrian chose his successor, a man named Antoninus Pius. But there was a catch. Hadrian told Antoninus, "You have to adopt this promising 17-year-old kid, Marcus." So he did. And when Antoninus died more than 2 decades later, the path was already set. Marcus was basically obligated to take power.
And you'd think he'd be thrilled, right? Nope. We're told by ancient writers that he greeted the news with sadness, not joy. He actually hated the idea of moving into the palace because he'd much rather just stick to his philosophical studies and live a simple life. He wanted nothing to do with all the ceremony and responsibility of being an emperor.
Now, if Marcus was hoping for a peaceful reign where he could sneak away and read philosophy, he was in for a rude awakening. The life he wanted was the polar opposite of the one he got. His time as emperor was just one crisis after another.
I mean, just look at this list. He was facing constant war on 2 fronts, against the Parthian Empire in the east and Germanic tribes in the north. He had to deal with a massive flood that caused a famine in the city of Rome itself. The treasury was being drained, so he had to devalue the currency just to pay for the military, and, as if all that wasn't enough, then came the plague. The Antonine Plague was an absolute catastrophe. It was probably smallpox, and historians figure it killed somewhere between 5 and 10 million people. Let that sink in. In the ancient world, that's an almost unimaginable number. It completely ravaged the army and the general population.
So how does anyone deal with that kind of relentless pressure? How do you find the strength to lead through war and famine and a pandemic, especially when it's a job you never even wanted in the first place? For Marcus, the answer was philosophy. His real sanctuary wasn't the palace, it was his own mind, disciplined by the principles of Stoicism. Stoicism gave him a kind of practical mental toolkit. The core idea is pretty simple. You can't control what happens out there in the world. You can't stop a war or a plague, but you can control how you respond to it. The goal is to stay calm and virtuous by focusing only on what's in your power, which is your own character, your own judgment.
So, picture this. During these long, miserable military campaigns on the frozen northern frontier, Marcus kept a journal. It's what we now call meditations. But this wasn't a book he was writing for other people. It was a private journal, notes to himself. It was his way of coaching himself through the absolute insanity of his daily life.
And in these private notes, you can really see him wrestling with his situation. Right here, he's basically reminding himself, okay, my principles still apply, even here. He's arguing that if you can live a good and virtuous life anywhere, then it must be possible to do it even in a place he found so difficult, the imperial palace.
And this wasn't just some abstract intellectual exercise for him. This was real. Marcus and his wife lost at least 8 of their children. This quote, it's just heartbreaking. It shows how he used Stoicism to cope with the worst grief imaginable. He's telling himself to shift his focus from what he can't control, whether his child lives or dies, to the one thing he can control, his own fear.
But for all his effort, all his discipline and duty, the ultimate irony of his reign is just tragic. It's about the one thing his philosophy couldn't seem to fix, his own son.
The difference between them is just staggering. It's like night and day. You have Marcus, the philosopher king, a man defined by duty and self-control. And then you have his son and successor, Commodus, who was erratic, self-indulgent, and had none of his father's discipline. The great era of the 5 good emperors literally died with Marcus. The long Roman peace, the Pax Romana, it all started to crumble under Commodus.
The historian Cassius Dio, who actually lived through this whole transition, gave this absolutely devastating verdict. He said, the change from Marcus to Commodus was like watching history descend from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. People saw the decline happening in real time.
And yet, here's the amazing thing. While his empire eventually fell and his own son undid so much of his work, something from Marcus Aurelius has survived for almost 2,000 years. And it's not his military victories or his laws. It's that little private journal he never wanted anyone to see. This is why Meditations is still so powerful today. This is not philosophy written from some comfy ivory tower. This is wisdom that was forged in the fire of absolute power, constant crisis, and devastating personal loss. It's a real, practical guide to keeping your head on straight when the world is going crazy, written by someone who is actually living it at the highest possible level. And that really leaves us with one final thought. Marcus Aurelius was dealing with war, political chaos, a pandemic, and deep personal grief. Sound familiar? In a world that often feels just as turbulent, the real question for us is, what can we learn from the private thoughts of a man who just tried to be good in a job that was anything but?